I hope and trust and pray that for most of you, you have been having a very Merry Christmas season. Today is the 11th day of Christmas. We still have one day left to make merry, as they say. You know, Christmas, for many, although it can have some difficult times, I think a lot of us look back to our childhood, to those magical memories that we had of Christmases growing up. You know, when everything seemed so perfect. Of course, the reality was it probably wasn't that perfect. But memory has a way of allowing us to forget the negative. You know, as we were growing up, every single Christmas, we would, on Christmas Day, hop in our father's car to drive the 3 hours to go to the south side of Chicago in Blue Island, Illinois, to see and be with Grandma Hofer. Now, Grandma Hofer was a truly devout Christian lady. Stubborn, German, but very, very devout. And you know, when I went to her house, you just pulled up, and it was one of these old brick stucco homes from like the turn of the last century. You know, just big and majestic. And when you got there, you knew you were home, and you walk on into the kitchen, and you'd always smell. She would have her percolator coffee pot on. And those smells that would waft through the house, whether it be going upstairs with those extremely high staircase. And I remember those push-button light switches, you know. And it was always musty upstairs. And then, of course, there was the one and only bathroom that she had, which smelled like lavender, because everything in there was purple and lavender. And of course, any morning when you got up, you would go into the kitchen, and she would have her Christian radio station on, and there would always be cinnamon toast ready to butter. That was Grandma's house. And, you know, it was good memories going to Grandma's house. But of course, being on the south side of Chicago, it wasn't necessarily the safest place for kids to go around and play. So we did like most kids did in the 70s and early 80s. We would either just go out to the yard, or we would sit and watch television. No, there were no video games for us to play, so good old TV. And when in Chicago, you do what the Chicagoans do, and you turn on WGN. Long before it became a cable powerhouse, WGN was the station to turn to for news, for sports, and on Saturday mornings and afternoons, the best place to watch the old Japanese B movies that were always dubbed over. One of my favorites being the Godzilla movies. Loved Godzilla. You know, that great mythical creature that evolved from the earth from the sea after the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Godzilla, who could destroy everyone. But the best thing about the Godzilla movies is whenever Godzilla would go on to the shore and be in the city, and he'd be like marching about going, "Arr!" And then you would see all the people running down the streets, screaming and yelling, dubbed of course, trying to flee from Godzilla. I mean, just classic B movie stuff. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's great. That whole flee for your life mentality. And, you know, as far as I was concerned, that was the only flee for my life mentality that I would ever have to see. Leave it on the TV. Of course, The reality is, people have to flee for their lives more than we think. Do you remember 10 years ago on December 26th? Off the coast of Indonesia, there was that 9.1 earthquake, which caused a tsunami, which killed 230,000 people along the Indian Ocean. And you hear horror stories of people literally running for their lives to get away from those waves, hanging on to things, because it's amazing what Mother Nature can do. And then the next year, down in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, that perfect storm that came on up and people got stuck and stranded. Or let's be honest, just 2 years ago, here on Long Island, when Superstorm Sandy hit, and those who always knew they were in a flood zone but knew they were somewhat safe, never realized that the water would be 8 to 10 feet tall, and people would have to literally flee for their lives. You know, people flee from their lives throughout our world with natural disasters. People also flee through their lives with human-made disasters. How many times do you know individuals, or maybe you yourself, that had to flee from an abusive spouse? How many times have individuals had to flee from somebody who was self-destructing in front of them, and the only way to survive was to get the heck out of town? How many times have you known people to flee from jobs because either A, it's unsafe for them in a work environment, or B, things just get too tough and they don't know how they can do it? Don't we all know people who can never hold down a job? We flee as an instinctive human bit of our nature. Darwin called it survival of the fittest, fight or flight. You know, if somebody has a gun shooting at me, I'll probably go running pretty fast. Especially since I wouldn't have a gun to shoot back. If a tsunami is coming, I'm going to run. If there's danger, we flee. You know, this morning we hear in this gospel passage about an angel warning Joseph in a dream that Herod was attempting to kill Jesus, and that they were to go into the land of Egypt, the land of Exodus that the people came out of, a land that they had not been in for hundreds of years. He had to flee with his wife and their infant in order to provide safety for them, because Herod was so afraid of losing power that he would be willing to do whatever it would take, including murdering an innocent child. I can't imagine being Mary and Joseph and Jesus, leaving everything you have behind. Imagine if I had to tell you today, you gotta just leave right now. You can't pick up anything. Just go. You gotta get out. You gotta get safe. How difficult would that be? Leaving family behind, leaving friends behind, leaving everything you knew behind, but you do what you gotta do in order to remain safe. The good news, my sisters and my brothers, is once they got to Egypt, although we don't hear much about it, they were safe. We don't have that in-between stories. You can go to Cairo today, you can see the alleged cave where they stayed. But you knew that they were safe. aliens in their own, in a different land. And I wonder if that's a lesson for each and every one of us. The chances of you and I having to flee are probably not that great. But the chances that you and I can provide a safe place for people who are fleeing in their lives is much greater. When we were growing up in Wisconsin, our family and our church sponsored 2 Hmong families from Laos. 2 families that were fleeing for their lives, that came over to start something new, and the community there did everything it could to welcome them in our midst. My family growing up, I remember one time we took in this teacher and his wife and their 2 kids because they had no place to stay. They were homeless. These lessons for me growing up are all about willing to be there for those who are fleeing for whatever the case might be. And sometimes all the individual needs is somebody simply to sit and listen, to not judge, and to offer a safe place for them to be. The victim of domestic violence just needs to get to a home without any fear of reprisal. The victim of a bully needs to find a friend who's willing to stand up with him or her. The victim of a war-torn world needs to have countries to be able to take the refugees in. And instead of looking down, to love. You know, I pray that you and I never, ever, ever will have to flee. The truth is, probably some of you already have in your lives. But I do pray that if somebody is fleeing towards us, somebody is fleeing to find hope and comfort and sanctuary in our lives and in our communities, we'll be there like the people of Egypt were to take Mary and Joseph and Jesus in. When we flee, there's fear. But when people flee, we can provide hope. Amen.